I am Lisa Singer. I am the Senior Editorial Director of Brand Insider at MediaPost. And this is Brand Insider BTS, where I get to pull back the curtain on some of the most influential women marketers today. And with me is Anna Malmqvist, and she is the Chief Brand Officer at The Melting Pot. Hey, Anna.
Hey Lisa, thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you could do this. And I've never been to a melting pot. So I started researching you and looking it up. And there's one right near me. I'm in New York, one right in White Plains. And honestly, I can't believe I haven't because melting cheese is so up my, like I love it. So, and it just looks so cozy and just not at all what I expected. So I'm very excited to try it sometime.
Please do. Let me know when you're heading there.
Yes, I will. It's like I said, anything with cheese is we have cheese. So, all right. Well, anyway, I also, in my snooping, aside from finding that I am living near a melting pot, I noticed on LinkedIn you posted you had worked at P&G earlier in your career, and you were recently featured on the P&G alumni podcast called Learning from Leaders. Now, first of all, I mean, that congratulations. That's really an honor. That must have been really fantastic for you to be able to give back that way. And
Yeah, thank you. Yeah,
yeah, I'm
I
sure.
was I was honored to be invited to be on that. Yeah.
Yeah, and just to be remembered, I mean, because there's a lot of alumni, I'm assuming, and to be, called upon for that. So right there, I think is really a wonderful, it must have been a wonderful experience for you. But I, of course, always want to turn it on you. And so in your career, I'm sure you've had many leaders who you've learned from and given advice. But I'm just curious, is there one that stands out that really gave you the best advice in your career early on?
Absolutely. And speaking of P&G, it was somebody from P&G that I still today consider a mentor and I speak to very frequently. So her name is Lisa Reynolds. And yeah, not only you've had Lisa on the show.
Yes, not my show. Actually, I don't think I've interviewed her for this show. I think I started to, and she was leaving, going to another. But yes, we've had her at our events speaking. So,
Well,
anyway,
I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised because she's a wonderful leader and she's been an amazing mentor to me in so many ways. She was one of the people that first interviewed me for my role at Procter and Gamble, even though I didn't actually work with her for that role. And then when I changed roles, I was working for her. I was her assistant brand manager.
mhm.
And then I stepped into her role when I got promoted to brand manager, and she moved into a different role. So she's always been a presence in my life. And like I said, to this day, we bounce things off of each other all the time. But one of the things that she taught me was don't be afraid to raise your hand. And that has always stuck with me. So she's always encouraged me to step up when needed. Um, and this has served me very well at Procter and Gamble and at Bloom and Brand. So that has always led to great opportunities when you're not afraid to raise your hand and kind of do the things that you might not be have been expected to do, but you do them anyway.
Yeah, no, I think that's incredible advice. And I think especially for women, I
Mhm.
think at least from, my experience and people I've been speaking with so many of the women that I speak to for the show. And early on, that was something that they had to get over. And for someone who you respected to tell you that early on, it must have been a great way to sort of, I don't know, was that a fear of yours? Like, was that, or maybe not a fear, but something that you might have held back on thinking, oh, I'm too new, I shouldn't do this.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's one. I think it's one of those things. You're right. As women, you're potentially hesitant to do something like that, especially I would say my generation and coming up through college, there wasn't everybody. You just did your work and you presented your work and that was your work.
Yeah.
And coming out of business school where things were much more done in a team capacity and everybody had a role to play. I think there it was a little bit more specific, like, okay, this is your role and this is your role and this is your role, and everybody comes together. But when you're in a work environment where all of a sudden there are shifts and there are people that leave and roles that are going to be open for a while, when you raise your hand or volunteer to do some of that extra work,
Yeah.
you do get recognized and you learn from it and you can take that. So instead of thinking about the negative, like, oh my gosh, I'm going to have more work to do, think about the positive and what you're going to learn from it and what you can take with you to the next role.
Yeah, and that you say that because early on in my career, I took up right out of college a job just at a small agency, an ad agency, and I loved writing, and my position wasn't doing that. So we used to hire out for the press releases and things. And I just said, I'm just going to start doing it. And
Mhm.
I ended up, that was my job, it's, so I think it reminds me of that. Like, just, I didn't
Yeah,
realize I was doing that, but it's like, you jump in where you, especially where you want to be, because you don't always start in the career that you're looking for or the ultimate spot where you want to get.
exactly right. Yeah, sometimes it just works out that way. Same thing happened to me. I would say at Bloom and Brands, I was the director of marketing communications for Carrabba's at the time, and my counterpart, who was the director of product marketing, moved on to a different brand, and so that was open. And so I again raised my hand and basically was doing both roles for an extended period of time because coming with my experience from Procter and Gamble, I realized that at Bloom and Brands, there was an opportunity to work further upstream than I felt that the brand was working. And by moving into that product role, already having that marketing communications role, I was able to pull that strategically further upstream together and brought my agency further upstream with me so that they had better visibility to the calendar and the roadmap and all the different things that we were going to be doing. And so that created a better product concept fit in P&G terms that we
Yeah.
could apply to the restaurant and to the promotions that we were doing and just plan that much further out. And it made our communication that much stronger. So I always do see it as a great opportunity.
Yeah, no. And I think people need to, especially when you're younger, don't always expect payback right away. You know what I mean? You make an investment, and I would say pay the dues, whatever it is. As you
Yeah.
said, you're kind of doing two jobs at once, but down the line, that's how if you're ambitious, if you have
Mhm.
aspirations, and you have to just be that team player who just wants to keep moving forward and taking on new things. I'm
Yeah.
curious, and you don't have to give a person's name, but what's the worst advice you ever received early on in your career?
Yeah, and this was early on. It wasn't it wasn't it wasn't advice per se, but it was a phrase. And that phrase is that you can't do fill in the blank.
Mhm.
And at the time, the context for that was that I before business school, before graduate school, I was in financial services. I worked at Merrill Lynch. And then I was in business school. And then the summer between my first and second year came up and I had an internship. And I was very strategic in terms of that internship because I wanted to pivot to marketing from financial services. But I thought that if I interned in a financial services capacity in a firm or agency or company that was financial services related, I could then, having financial services under my belt and knowing that industry very well, I could then focus on marketing it and then I could focus my career for post business school on marketing specifically. And so I interned at Citibank in New York. And the person that I was reporting to, we were talking, and she says, "Well, what do you want to do after graduate school?" And I said, "Well, I want to, be a marketer, probably in CPG." And she told me, she's like, "Well, you cannot pivot from services to product. Like you just can't do that." I said, "Well, why not?"
Why?
Why
Right.
not? She says, "No, they're very different. You can't do that." And it was just it was like you will never go into consumer products because of this 3-month internship
Right. Right.
at Citibank. And I just thought that was crazy. Number one, telling me something what I can't do. And number two, telling me something as concrete as like, you can't pivot from services to consumer products. So, it wasn't the specific, it was like that idea of like telling me what I can't do, because number one, that's going to motivate me more to do it and
Hmm.
show you that I can. And of course, that's exactly what I did. And after graduate school, I went and worked at L'Oreal. So I think that I would never tell somebody that they can't do something. I would flip it and tell them that they can, and try to figure out a way, what are that little avenues and strategies that you can use to get there.
Right. Well, and that's, I think, key is if someone's going to you for help or mentor, like a younger person wanting to sort of get your advice, then yes, you kind of, not that you have steps per se, although sometimes there are, but just things that you can advise. It's going to be difficult, or even not even say that, but just say, in order to cross over or whatever it may
Yeah.
be, you're going to need to get this under your belt. You're going to need to do this. So maybe start, volunteer, whatever it may be, and give someone that kind of advice as opposed to, I mean, unless I came to you and said, well, I'm going to be a brain surgeon next week, then maybe tell me I can't do that. That might
I
be
still
okay.
wouldn't.
But in general, it's just not. So, all right, I'm just starting out and I'm coming to you saying, I want to be you, and so obviously you had not a straight career, it sounds like you varied and pivoted and got to talk about your path per se in terms of getting to where you are. And what would you, out of that, because no one's going to follow that exactly. No one will follow anyone's career path exactly. But what's the most valuable things you've learned from that path that you would then advise someone else starting out?
Yeah. I mean, my advice to somebody, very similar to an earlier question you had, is don't ask for permission to lead.
Mm,
I think coming again, going back to, how high school, college, it was all very individual. Leadership was not something that was taught. I think, and then you come into a work environment and it's all about leadership and how do you lead. And so that's something that I very much had to learn. But I had good role models as well. And we can also talk about that. But what I would tell somebody that coming in now is don't ask for permission to lead. Leadership is such an essential skill. And it's something that you should not, especially as a woman, be hesitant around. So I think for me, some of my and I can walk you through how I got there, but some of my biggest career inflection points happened when I did this, when I gave myself permission to lead. So that's about, showing up like an owner, not just about, what job were you hired to do, but what do you see as the bigger opportunity? If you see a gap, fill it, raise your hand. If you have a better idea, propose it. What's the worst thing that can happen?
right.
Because, one thing I learned at Procter & Gamble, it's all about, taking the initiative and following through. So initiative will get you noticed, and especially when it's paired with results.
Yeah.
So that's the advice. My path, to your point, was I don't know anybody that has a super traditional path these days, especially in business and especially in marketing,
Right.
as a part of business. Going back to college, I was a French major, right? So I was a French major with an art history and economics minor.
Uh,
So becoming chief brand officer.
right.
Yeah. So becoming chief brand officer of in hospitality in a company like this is, it's not something I envisioned for myself, at that time. But my path there makes very much sense. And so even if I go back to college and my art history minor and my French and languages in general, I interned in college at Sotheby's and the art auction house in New York City, and I very much love that. I loved art. I love the art world. I love mixing in my languages with that, and that's what I really wanted to do. Unfortunately, I graduated in a recession, and
Mm,
there were no jobs in the art market at that time because they weren't selling $83 million Van Goghs anymore. Like those days were kind of on pause for quite some time. So I moved to New York City anyway because, again, don't say no, right? I wanted to move to New York, try to find a job within the luxury goods space. If I broadened the art market into like broader luxury goods. So I was working at Tiffany and Companies in their corporate division, where I got to meet a lot of companies. And because companies would have corporate accounts for rewards and recognition programs and things like that. So I got to meet people and see what other companies were, literally right at your doorstep in New York City. And I was intrigued by a lot of them. And so I left Tiffany's and I went to work at Merrill Lynch. Big pivot, sounds like, right, from luxury goods retail to financial services. But
right.
you always have to look for these little connection points. And for me, that connection was languages. And I speak several languages. At the time, I spoke four. Today, I speak and understand six languages.
Wow. Right.
But growing up speaking Spanish, obviously speak English. I was a French major and I lived in Italy for some time. I was able to pivot to Merrill Lynch International. And it was really because of the languages, not so much my knowledge of financial services at the time, but I was hired because of you can teach me the financial services, you can't teach me the languages.
Right.
So I came to the table with that. I got that role, and I did that for some time until I decided that I wanted.
Marketing side there. So you was doing marketing, or what were you
No,
doing?
no, I was doing financial services.
Oh,
I was a sales assistant to financial consultants for high net worth individuals that were internationally based.
okay.
So a lot of the clients were from Latin America, European, places like that, where I literally put my languages to use every single day
Right.
in terms of their accounts and their trading and everything that they were doing. After a while, I realized that financial services really wasn't for me. And I wanted to go back to business school to, further my education because I think education is so important, and I always wanted to, exhaust the educational possibilities of my career. So I went back to business. I went to business school with a focus now on pivoting to marketing coming out of that. So I went to Georgetown, got my MBA at Georgetown, and like I already told you about, that summer in between where I, pivoted with Citibank to really get into marketing. And then coming out of marketing, my MBA, I went to L'Oreal. I was recruited from business school to L'Oreal. And that was really what I wanted to do. I loved the beauty industry. I wanted to do beauty marketing. And I was hired by the biggest, beauty company in the world, L'Oreal. So I did that. I loved that. I did that for a couple of years. I was promoted twice in that role at L'Oreal. And then I took a minute to think about my career again. I was getting promoted very quickly. After barely 2 years there, my next move would have been director at L'Oreal, marketing
Okay.
director. And if I was being honest with myself, I didn't think that a marketing director at L'Oreal could possibly mean the same thing as a marketing director at, say, a Procter and Gamble or a Unilever or a Johnson and Johnson, like these true marketing behemoths.
Yeah.
So I decided to take a step back and interviewed at Procter and Gamble. And Procter and Gamble is a promote from within company. So to go to Procter and Gamble and do marketing there, I had to take a step back and go be an assistant brand manager again, and then kind of start up that ladder again. And I did that because I thought that that was very much worthwhile for my career if I could get basically, Procter and Gamble Marketing University,
Right. Right.
as part of my background. So I did that, and I had two assistant brand manager roles there. One in fine fragrances, which was very different for P&G. It's prestige and it's department store. It's not mass market. And then my next role was mass market in cosmetics for P&G, and then I was promoted to brand manager. And at that time, I was married, we had our first daughter. And that, from a family standpoint, career and family and work life balance, now it all of a sudden started becoming more important to me. And so we had our first daughter when I was at Procter and Gamble. When I was pregnant with my second daughter, made the decision to separate with the company and be closer to family because we were by ourselves, living in Maryland, actually, where their beauty business was based. And it was an important decision. It was a very difficult decision. Had I been able to stay with P&G, I would have been thrilled because I really, really loved it. But just I'm from Florida, and it just really wasn't possible here unless it involved a lot of travel, which I also couldn't do. So moved here, and then again pivoted into Home Shopping Network, where I was there for a couple of years as a consultant. But again, because of all my extensive experience with beauty and with the female consumer, I was able to do a lot of projects for Home Shopping Network in those categories that were fashion, beauty, jewelry related, for example. Did a lot of projects in there. Had my second daughter right before that, and had my third daughter at the tail end of that. And then, now with three daughters, really felt the need to go back to work for my own sanity purposes, and also three girls are expensive. So went back to work, and again pivoted into hospitality, again using that female consumer to connect the dots for me. I had not worked in hospitality. I had not worked in an environment where the product and the service laddered up to a bigger experience. But again, was able to make that connection because of my experience in at Procter and Gamble, L'Oreal, et cetera. And so pivoted into hospitality is about almost 15 years ago now, and came to Bloomin' Brands, where I was at Carrabba's, and then was promoted to VP of product marketing at Outback. So the bigger brand at Bloomin' Brands, and then left there, consulted for another couple of years doing my own thing, and then have been at Melting Pot since. I actually started with them on a consulting basis in, let's say, Q4 2019. I
Mhm.
was asked to join them full time in January 2020, and then of course we know what happened. What, 8 weeks later, when the
Okay.
world went crazy, and but I've been here ever since.
Wow. No, I mean, it's so amazing. I think that the thread that you keep keeping though, and I think it's something that a lot of people, people who are hiring need to keep in mind. It's not a cookie cutter checklist, and I've talked about this a lot with many of the women that I speak with, that if you're just looking for that perfect resume, and I think women sometimes want to make sure that they do have that perfect resume. Like if they don't check all the boxes, they don't necessarily try for that position. But you're finding that this is where it overlaps. This is where my key strengths fit whatever this is. And then you move forward. And as you said, just go for it. Don't say no. Don't say you can't do it. Just continue doing it. And that's really how you find your career to make it fit for what's right for you. There was a time when
Yeah.
you moved forward and then a time when you needed to be slowing down a little bit for your family.
Absolutely. And, as a marketer, I guess that's the advantage that we have, right? Is that you can tell that story,
Mhm.
and you can make it all work and make it fit and be persuasive and convincing. You're not lying. You're just telling it, this is what I can bring to the table and this is how it applies. You might not see it immediately, but it's there. And let me connect those dots for you.
Yeah, no, and that's what I think people need to not disregard that resume. If you,
Mhm.
as you said, you kind of look at it because you get, say, a million resumes, and maybe half of them are still, check every box. So the other half get thrown away, but you may be getting rid of someone who would actually bring more to the table because of their varied experience, and they still have the same skill sets. So I think that sometimes that really does get overlooked, or sometimes, as I said, mostly women, but anyone. But for the most part, I think it's women who say, "Oh, I can't go for that job because I never did that." And it's like, just go and see what happens with it. But
Exactly right. And that's what I do when I read resumes. I also try to read more than that as well. So, having been on that side of it, I do try to, beyond more than what we're looking for, like, can this person actually do that? Or is there more there that I'm not necessarily reading, but I can interpret?
yeah, no, I completely agree. So I'm curious though, when people first meet you, so and what do they get wrong about you?
I thought I think that's an interesting question, that you're asking, because I do think, as a woman, and as a Latina woman, right or wrong, I do feel that I have to establish my presence and my knowledge right away. And so I do think that people can be intimidated, by me, and because people have told me this after they've gotten to know me. And the reality is, I think, and people have told me afterwards, that I actually am very approachable. But
Mhm.
people will tell me after they've gotten to know me, like, "Oh my God, I was so scared of you. I was so intimidated by you." And I'm like, "Well, why?" Because you know how I am. And they're like, "I don't know what it is, but like something that." Um, Whatever it is, there is an intimidation. There's an unintended intimidation
Right.
factor that I think hopefully goes away after the first conversation, because that's really not how I am.
Well, do you think as a Latina that maybe you and a woman, so because sometimes we feel like, and I can speak as a woman, that you have to come across a little bit more serious or
Mhm.
more confident than you are, and sometimes women who are considered, if they come across confident, then they get the B word, and different from that,
Mhm.
like
Oh,
just
yeah, yeah.
things. But I think that when you go into something, I'm just curious with your upbringing or with your when you were first starting out, did you feel you needed to kind of maybe put that little bit of a wall up, or not intention? I'm not saying that you were like, oh, but maybe be that's a little bit more serious so
Yeah.
that people would take you more seriously.
I think so. I do. I mean, I remember one of my earlier jobs at Merrill Lynch. I remember I was in the elevator with a woman who was more senior than me. She was a financial consultant. I was a registered sales assistant, and I don't know what we were talking about. I guess we were just talking about work and her job, and I complimented something she might have been wearing. And
Hmm.
one of the pieces of advice she said was, always dress for the job that you want, not the job that you have. Right. And I had never heard that before. And, I was like 20 something. And, I thought that was really good advice. And today I give that same advice to my daughter who just graduated from college and is in her first job. And
Hmm.
so, until you get more comfortable with people or until they really get to know you, you do have to be a little bit more formal and a little bit more polished and, just present yourself in that way because, first impressions they still matter very much. And that's something that I've been telling my girls ever since their first day of school, like always make a good first impression because you'll always get the benefit of the doubt. And I think in business, I think women have made tremendous strides. But I do think that, that first impression is very important. How you present yourself is very important. And you do want to be, taken seriously right from the beginning.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think that, look, as you said, it's changing, and we are seeing where you can relax. You can,
Yeah.
you said you let people, once they get to know you, work with you, they see that you are much more approachable. But I do think, especially younger women starting out, you don't want to be considered frivolous. And it's unfortunately, that's just sometimes what happens in the business world when it comes to women, depending on the business, obviously. But and we are seeing more women in marketing or in a lot of different industries. So that is changing.
Yeah. No, and I've been actually very fortunate to work in different businesses, right? So when I worked at L'Oreal, it was very female dominant and a lot of female leaders. And then I've worked in companies where the CEO was a woman. And then I also worked in, more male dominant companies and businesses, like financial services and some other restaurant businesses. So I've kind of seen the gamut. In all those cases, those women never let their guard down, in board meetings and big meetings, they never let their guard down. They felt they had to, kind of keep all that up. And I see it.
Yeah, I do. And I think it was more, I think today more women are letting their guard down. I think early on, like I've had this discussion with others who they felt like I even felt in a sense during my career, I got more help from men than women. And I felt like in looking back, I think it's more because there's only so many spots, or at the time, maybe there were only so many spots for women. And I don't know, I'm not sure. And that's sort of, but I think that's changing. I think we're seeing more organizations that are helping women. I think women are wanting to step up and help each other. But I do think that was a progression because they went through a lot more, whatever,
Mhm.
to get to where they are, SHI, so they had to deal with more. So maybe that puts that up there, so, but then now people like yourself are there ready to want to help other women and advance in their careers and women like your daughters. So I think
Mhm.
that that's a nice thing that we're seeing changing, but I do think it's been a progression.
Yeah, I agree. So I was an organization called Women Corporate Directors (WCD) for
Hmm.
women that are on corporate boards, and they I was invited to be on the Women Corporate Directors Women of Color Pipeline Program. So not only does this organization try to continue putting women on corporate boards, but
Hmm.
they're also now seeing a need to have more um, women of color, diversity, women on boards. So I was invited to be in this pipeline program with the Florida chapter. And so every year they bring in, you have to apply and you have to be accepted, but it's maybe like 10 to 12 women that are board ready. And they're trying to, bring you into this, teach you what it takes to get on a board. And that has been that was a wonderful experience to go through. I was in their second cohort, and
Hmm.
just the immense support that you get from women that are so incredibly accomplished, women that have been CEOs, that have worked for private equity, that have worked, I mean, just done everything. And they're on so many boards and have been on so many boards.
Mhm.
And just knowing that they're supporting you, they're teaching you, they're helping you, has just, I mean, I looked forward to every single one of those meetings, and we still meet and we still get invited to things even after the program ended. And so, yeah, I want to absolutely, continue paying that forward.
Yeah, no, and I'm because I know, even if you think about melting pot, the melting pot, it's basically, it means society where many different types of people come together as one. And I think that's such a good metaphor for what we want to see more in the workplace. And
Mhm.
that's seeing more women of color, more people of color, and just more different types of people, of all people together. And I know that that's something from, again, with my snooping on LinkedIn, that is something that's important to you and that you're known for bringing that together or bringing talented people and helping to develop their careers.
Mhm.
You talked about how you benefited. Why now? I mean, you're paying it forward, so I think that's awesome. But why do you feel like some people say, well, why do we need to do this? Why can't, why is it important to step up that way, to try to bring in all different people to, whether it's to the boards or to senior positions or whatever it may be into your organization?
I mean, different perspectives are so important. And I think that's the beauty of the idea of the melting pot, right? Not of the restaurant, but the idea of the melting pot. The fact that melting pot kind of brings that to life in so many ways, um,
Mhm.
has just been a kind of cherry on top from my career standpoint. And that, we do bring people, around this table, and kind of everything is forgotten because you're so immersed in what you're doing.
Yeah.
But I think it's critically important to have all these different viewpoints come to the table. I mean, if I speak about paying it forward, my mother, my family is from Cuba, and my mother immigrated from Cuba because of Castro, back in the day, and she came over as a teenager. And fast forward a couple of years, she went to medical school, and she was one of two women in her medical school class. And one of her professors made it a point to come up to those two women, my mother and her colleague, and said that they were taking the place of two men in that program. Right? This is a long time ago. No one would ever say that today, but that was the case. Not only did my mother graduate, she was already married, by the way, and then she was pregnant with me. She took 3 days off from medical school and went right back 3 days later after having me, right?
Right.
Maternity leave. She's like, I didn't have maternity leave. I didn't have any of these things that you guys have, right?
Right.
So, knowing how hard it was for her at that point, I obviously didn't have it that hard. Um, but you do see how things have changed, and in some cases, still have more work to do. And so I feel that it's very important for me having that legacy of, a working mother. And by the way, my grandmothers also worked. My grandfathers were doctors, and my grandmothers worked for that, with them and for them, and kind of ran those practices for them. Now my mother is, full on doctor, operating on people, delivering babies. That was what she did. And then, fast forward to me, how can I continue carrying that legacy forward? And so, yes, making sure that, and I'm making sure that I help women, help minority women, help minorities in general. How can I continue helping them as I've learned over time? And that's something that I very much instill in my daughters as well. Recently there was a lot on LinkedIn going around. We opened a location here in St. Pete, and it was featured in St. Petersburg, Florida, and it was featured. There were some articles on LinkedIn, and there was a picture of the Melting Pot leadership team. And I'm the only woman on the Melting Pot leadership team. And so we were all sitting, and I'm like in the middle, and everybody's kind of wearing dark clothes, and I'm wearing like something colorful. And
Mhm.
and so I saw this yet come up again on LinkedIn, and I showed my daughters. I'm like, you see this picture? You see how I'm the only woman there? I am there for you.
Right.
I get emotional doing that. But I do what I do for you guys.
Yeah.
And I don't want to be the only woman up there. And so when the day comes, whatever you guys do, but there's a picture of you and with your coworkers or your leadership team or whatever it is. I hope that there's more women there, because you guys, that is now your torch to carry too.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's, I think, amazing. I think that's, I mean, I can't believe that that was said to your mom, in the sense, but it's like the guy brings home the bacon, like whatever, like that's the whole old, you know, but you wouldn't have thought it was not like that's not that long ago. You know what I mean?
No,
It's your mom, yes, but your mom, I can't imagine your mom's that old. You know what I mean? So it's like I just feel like, Mom, we're not calling you old, so it's just I think that that's amazing that it even then that we were hearing things like that. And
crazy. And it's funny because my parents, they recently moved, downsized, and so we found a lot of things. And so one of the pictures that they have, it's my mother and my stepfather now, and it's a picture from when they were residents, because they met during their residency. And she was, again, the only woman in that residency. And so you see all these men like wearing the lab coats and the ties, and they all look exactly the same. And there's my mom, very cute, and then she didn't look like one of the guys. She had, she was done up, she was wearing like this very cute little mini dress with her little lab coat, but it's funny because she and my stepdad were like diametrically opposed to each other in the picture. Like she was over here and he was on here. Like, okay, you guys were dating at that time. I don't know why I had to be such a secret in this picture.
right.
But yeah, it was shocking to me that was the case back then. I mean, you heard about it with like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, but she was obviously much older than my mother, but yeah, that still existed, and in certain professions still.
Yeah, and as you said, I mean, it's obviously gotten better in so many, depending on the organization, depending on the industry, but things are getting better, but it's always something to continue working towards. And it's not just to promote one particular, like I said, it's not just always about women or people of color or men who do this, like whatever. It's like, 'cause it's just the more, I think you said it earlier, the more different people you have, the more different ideas. And especially as marketers, that is so much more important because your audience are all different kinds of people and you want to relate to all of them.
Yeah, there's all different perspectives, and frankly, there's always different stakeholders. I mean, when you think about my current role, there's our franchisees, right? They are, one set of stakeholders. There are our guests, our consumers. That's another, set of stakeholders.
Mhm.
There are our multifunctional counterparts, and each one of them, are different stakeholders in their own way, and everybody brings a different perspective. And I do too, right? But I also make sure that I am able to see it their way. Not everybody does, right? And so I always try to, understand, listen first, and stand in their shoes. And I think, again, the fact that I come from a different culture. I grew up in a different culture. I grew up speaking different languages. The fact that in so doing, I've had to put myself in other people's shoes. It's something so inherent to me and so natural to me that maybe I'm able to do that, better. But it's, it, I do value all those perspectives. And so sometimes when you get in those situations, you're like, okay, but I see it all these different ways. At the end of the day, you have to make a decision.
Right.
But having the ability and appreciating those different perspectives, I think is critical.
Yep, keeping that open mind. Well, so I want to ask, I have one more question, which is actually a few parts to it. But first of all, happy anniversary. Melting Pot just celebrated, 50 years. So very nice. And so in the celebration on your website, it says 50 years or the perfect night out. And then then it goes to the go-to destination for memorable dining experiences. So as I said, a few parts to my question. One, what is the most memorable experience in your career for you?
Mm.
Not campaign, but for you.
My most memorable experience. I have to go way back because it made such an impression on me. But it gave me a taste for things and that I just wanted more, which was being in the room when big decisions are made. When I was at L'Oreal, I was in the room when the decisions were made to hire Beyonce and to hire Jennifer Lopez
Wow.
as spokesmodels. This is a
Mhm.
long time ago, and this is like right at the cusp, like right before they completely exploded. And
Mhm.
so being in the room where those discussions were had and those decisions were being made were pretty amazing to me, and knowing the trajectory that those careers had afterwards. I wasn't part of the decision making. I was literally an assistant marketing manager. I was,
Beyond.
but I was there and I was in that room and I'm like, wow, I really like being in the room where these decisions were being made. And so that kind of like set me on my path to, being a leader and making sure that I'm in that room.
That's awesome. And women of a color, of women who, as you said, were just taking off. So there's just a lot there that then sort of emulates
Mhm.
what your career, what you find that is most important to you in your career, or something, one of the most important things. Okay, so now I want to ask you, what's the most memorable experience for you in your personal life?
Oh, well, I mean, it's very personal, I guess, but it would be having my daughters, right? Just three memorable experiences. It's such a blessing to me, one, two, and now three, right? I mean, I think three daughters is pretty special. I love it. Um, so yeah, I think that's obviously very memorable and personal and ongoing for me, right?
Of course. Well, that's perfect for an answer from a mom. And finally, since, we're the melting pot, we have to talk restaurants and food. So what's your most memorable dining experience? Can't include the melting pot.
Well, my coworkers are going to be very angry about this question. I'm not even going to tell you it was a restaurant. My most memorable dining experience is super random, but it was a Swedish wedding. So my husband is Swedish, and we were at some good friends at their wedding a while ago, and they were both from very different parts of Sweden. And the experience that they created at that reception and that dinner was so beautiful because they every single course was harkened back to some memory of where they were from and the region of Sweden that they were from. And but it was completely reimagined. So it wasn't like, meatballs or anything like that, right? It was the bride was from the northern part of Sweden. And so the appetizer was like reindeer carpaccio. And so every course was just so beautifully thought out and so perfectly presented in this spectacular yet cozy setting that I think, and of course, such a warm and lovely moment, for them and for everybody involved. I mean, that wedding brought me in all in. And so I think that was my most memorable, a very memorable dining experience for me.
Wow, that sounds incredible. And what, like, I'm sure for them that must have been the most, like, to plan it and to then to have that as their own memory. So I'm sure it's one of their most
And it
memorable.
wasn't, yeah, and it wasn't this like opulent over the top affair at all. I mean, I remember their flowers was it was in the winter.
Mhm.
It was like a December wedding, which as you can imagine was just freezing. And but their arrangements were it was just like this vase and one each vase had just like this one giant white rose, biggest roses I've ever seen. I've never seen anything like that. And then somehow in the water, it made it look like they were in ice. It was just every little touch was so personal and so interesting and so perfectly done that I was just every little thing just had me captivated. It was beautiful.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. And you need to send at least this portion of this of this interview to your friends. But Anna, thank you so much. It was such a pleasure talking with you. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I had fun talking to you too.
Good. I'm glad. And thank you for watching. And as I always say, if you know a memorable woman marketer like Anna, I'm sorry, I always go, I'm thinking of the what's that show, the movie with the snow. Make us
Oh, Frozen.
I'm putting frozen Anna on you. If you know an amazing woman, please let me know, and I will do my best to tell her story. Thanks for watching, and again, thanks, Anna.
Thanks, Lisa.